We are back on the Zero Hour. With us for this segment and the following segment, we're delighted to say, is Terry O'Neill, a good friend of the program. She is, of course, the president of NOW, the National Organization for Women. She is a feminist attorney, a professor, and an activist for social justice. She's been president of NOW since she was elected in June of 2009, and she's here with us to talk about a couple things, including Yes, All Women, and the response to the shootings in Isla Vista, California. Terry, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Richard, it's so great to talk to you again.
Well, thank you for that. And listen, one of the things that really affected me the most about the tragedy in Santa Barbara was the response online and the movement, the hashtag called Yes All Women, but also the fact that it felt as if it might be and could still be a teaching moment. I know I learned something from it, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is a teaching moment on a number of levels, really on a number of issues. It was one of the things that just really jumped out at me is how quickly that hashtag started trending. Eventually, you had, and within a short period of time, it had gotten I think 1 million hits within a week or two. The Twitter is a platform that women can access, and women do not have much of a megaphone, right? You look at corporate America, and you've got only 5% of CEOs are women, and the vast majority of them are white women. But younger women and women of color in particular are the highest users of Twitter. And the highest growing users of Twitter. And that's the platform, that's the megaphone. And what was really striking was how quickly the conversation just went global and how poignant the posts were. Mm-hmm. So the one, and I saw a number of variations of this post, but it went something like this. Hashtag Yes All Women, because I tell a guy I have a boyfriend to get him to stop hitting on me because he's more likely to respect a non-existent man than to respect me. And
absolutely.
And I don't know any woman who hasn't done that. I promise you.
Which brings up a great point in terms of this, and I want to hear more of these, but, for me as a man, listening to this, sometimes insight seems to be when something tells you something that at some level you already knew. Right. And one of the things that struck me reading the Yes All Women hashtag comments was, I knew a lot of this already. I mean, I don't think any woman I know has not lived in the threat of sexually related violence in one way or another. I don't think any woman I know. I don't think the one you just read. I don't think any woman I know wouldn't answer any differently than you did. That of course she does that, and of course I never thought about it. But of course it's because the guy hitting on her would respect a non-existent or mythical yeah. or real other male more than he would respect her. So. That's what I think is part of the teaching moment in all this.
That exactly. That's and closing the loop is what, because yes, I know so many women who've done that, but I don't know very many women who have closed the loop by saying, in other words, he respects non-existent men more than he respects the woman. That is a cultural piece. And and I think so. When we're thinking about these things, I really think we have to sort of manage somehow to keep these disparate strands of information in our heads all at the same time. I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said that the numbers of rapes on campus, right? We know now that approximately 1 in 5 women will be raped during their college career. But she was telling me that actually the number of men who commit rape on college campuses ranges by some estimates at 3% and by other estimates at 6%. That is a striking statistic on how rape is a serial crime mostly committed by predators.
Well, and
so we need to keep that in mind when we say, hashtag Yes All Women. All women have this experience, and have experiences about that business of, telling them you have a boyfriend because you know that'll get them to stop hitting on you. That's pretty ubiquitous, but let's be clear, predatory behavior is a small slice of men,
Right.
and we need to figure out sort of how to remember those two pieces of information at the same time.
This gets to a really great point that I'd love to talk about with you, Terry, if we can, which is, I think there are, simplistically speaking, two categories of issues that have come up in terms of women feeling safe, women feeling respected, and everything that was catalyzed by this act of violence against women in terms of the male response. And, I've been in a lot of discussions about this, intergender discussions, where women will say legitimately, this is not about how we present this issue to you as men in a way that it works for you. This is not about you. And I get that.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think there are two categories here, and I think if we separate them, it might help the communication process. One is the act of serial predators, like you just described, the idea that one college man in 20 or one in 15 might be responsible for assaults on one woman in 5, one woman in 3, whatever the statistics turn out to be.
Right.
That maybe we need a different language for talking about that, because I know a lot of guys, and look, the other side of it is that my daughter in particular, was fascinated by Mad Men, the TV show. And I think she was fascinated. I asked her, and she said, yes, it's a glimpse in a world that we grew up in that was so profoundly sexist that it seems like an alien planet. But to her, and I'm delighted that there's been that much change, but we need so much more. And so many of us, particularly men, are refugees from that alien planet. So
Right.
I think a lot of men who are well-intentioned get defensive and say, hey, I never raped anybody in college.
Right.
And I think there's maybe it's my job as a man, but I think there are two types of conversations to have with a guy like that. One is, no, you didn't, but you don't deserve a medal for that, number one. You don't get a medal for not being a predator.
Yeah.
And number two, what you do need to do is work on, as a man, on changing the culture that tolerates that looks away from that enables that, and to check your own, I mean, I know check your privilege is a sensitive topic now, but to check your own behavior when it comes to the things you do that are frightening or disturbing or unsettling, that you may not realize. Look, nobody's calling you bad in your soul or an evil person. They're just saying, look, you were programmed as a man to do and say certain things you thought were okay. It's just time to learn they're not okay. Does that kind of make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I really do. I think that the Feminist Project has done enormous good by encouraging girls and women to think of themselves as a potential president of the United States, a potential president of a huge corporation, a leader in her community, a person who can solve problems because she's smart and capable and talented, and that she can use those talents to make her community better and to provide for her family. All of those things we've done really well with women. We've done quite well with men, actually, buying into women as contributors to their communities and women as providers for their families. More than half of women today are either the sole provider of their whole family or an essential provider, so essential that if she gets laid off within 60 days, they're not making the rent, right?
Right.
So men have been very good about supporting the women in their families, and you've got a lot of male support these days for closing the gender wage gap because they see all this money not coming to their family because their wives or their girlfriends are being underpaid. Okay. What I think the feminist movement has yet to do is to encourage men to conceive of themselves as recipients of women's provision, as recipients of women's leadership, as followers of women. Right now, I think male identity is still awfully wrapped up in these ideas of dominance. And if there's one place where what we call rape culture shows itself over and over and over again. It's in high school football and college football and even professional football or other sports where scandals of sexual assault by a popular male sport figure is covered up by the community because the community protects the sports figure rather than protecting the sexual assault victim.
Right.
And I think that has to do with dominance. I think it has to do with this sense that we revere the men who are really, really dominant, over something. And if we can get away from that and really understand that true manhood is learning when to follow, right? When to receive, when to accept, and when to lead, and when to provide. And that's a piece of the feminist project that we have not succeeded at yet.
Yeah, I mean, as you describe it, we're going to go to a break in a second, but as you describe it, it sounds a little bit like dancing. I mean, the men were always taught, when we were 5 years old and had to wear our little suits and ties and everything, and went to dancing school that, you lead and she follows, but actually, sometimes you lead, sometimes she leads. We had the 60s. We learned that, when the Grateful Dead came out or whatever. We learned sometimes you lead the woman, sometimes she leads you. Now we just need to translate in that thinking into our everyday life. That's my simplistic analogy.
I think that's exactly right. I think as the closer we get to that, the better there will be. Although there's a book from, I think it was from the 1990s, that I've always liked the title of it, and it said the stronger women get, the more men love football. So,
well, we'll have to finish that thought after the break, unfortunately. But we will be right back, and we'll see if that's true. We'll be right back with Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women, after these messages. And we are back on the Zero Hour with Terry O'Neill, feminist attorney, professor and activist for social justice, and president of the National Organization for Women. Terry, I feel like there's so many ways we could take this conversation, but when we left, you were saying, what was the name of that book you mentioned?
The Stronger Women Get. Now, this is from the 1990s, and the book was The Stronger Women Get, the More Men Love Football. I think the author's point was that as women succeeded more and more in getting more and more rights and being able to move more and more into paid employment as opposed to unpaid work and other things, that she was seeing a cultural shift to sort of manly, a kind of a concern with manliness. What does it mean to be manly, a manly man? And so she was critiquing this shift over to considering something like a sport like football as the pinnacle of manhood. And in some ways, I think that she's right. I think that the forces of backlash, which always exist, no matter what kind of progress you're trying to make, whether it's civil rights or women's rights or LGBT rights, there's always going to be a backlash. And in the case of women's rights, the backlash very much takes the form of a sense that somehow men lose, and they lose their identity. Right. If women gain equality. The reality is that backlash is itself not succeeding. As I said, what we've seen in the past 10 years is strong increases in men's support for eliminating the wage gap for women, because they understand that the women are bringing that money into their family. What we're seeing is an increase in men's support for our efforts to stop the Catholic bishops from criminalizing abortion and even restricting birth control. So we are slowly but surely changing the culture and changing really what it means to be a man versus what it means to be a woman. But I think we have to be very cognizant of how difficult that change is and how focused we have to be in order to achieve the change.
And while we're on that topic, what it gets to me, and it always does, as you know, with me, is the economic dimension of all this, and the way that gender roles are used to perpetrate economic inequality. And as you're saying, men are beginning to see that in terms of equal pay. But you have, for example, the idea that the manly man and the little woman at home or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the current manifestation of that is also, in a sense, keeping whole classes of people down. But you get the inverse of that too, where there are ways in which it seems to me people try to cast economically or culturally negative stereotypes as somehow feminist. But and I know we're getting into a controversial area, but it seems to me, for example, that the idea that you see these articles about women learning to lap dance or something or dance on a flagpole or whatever they call it as a
Oh,
form
yes.
of feminist empowerment. I don't buy it. I don't
Yes.
buy that reinforcing the objectification of women as sexual objects does anything more than put a pseudo-feminist justification on the objectification of women. I was sent out to buy birthday presents for a friend's daughter. She was 8, and they were these Bratz dolls, Bratz, very sexualized for little girls. I don't buy that that's anything more than another way to sell product, commercialize people, and distract them from their own economic oppression. Am I getting it wrong?
I think you're absolutely getting it right. I think the commercialization of it is the key, because commercialization of anything has nothing to do with achieving equality for women or for any segment of the population. And, in terms of women's participation in the sort of gray market, the grayish part of the sex industry, to me, what you always need to look at is, let's look at the rates of violence against women in the workplace, and let's see where the rates of violence in the workplace are highest. Well, inevitably, you find that in the sex industry. That's a cold, hard fact. If,
Right.
in fact, pole dancing or stripping is culturally, and I want to make a distinction between individuals and cultures here, is culturally empowering to women, you would not see that sector have such extraordinarily high rates of violence against women in the workplace. And I'm talking about physical assault and sexual assault. Right.
Right.
So
And
culturally, we know that the sex industry is not about empowering women. Culturally, it's not about making women stronger. Now, individually, I know women personally who have made money from stripping and from pole dancing, and I have nothing but respect for the particular women that I know. They had issues in their lives, they had food to put on the table, they had kids to support, and they did that. They did not do that because they thought they were making a strike for women's equality. They did
right.
it because they had some economic imperatives that they need to take care of right at that moment. That's a different
Right,
thing.
and that's just to jump in. I just want to make clear, I wasn't talking about people who do it for a living. I was
Right.
talking about this kind of movement you see where, like, young professional women or whatever, it's encouraged for them to think that this is somehow, that this not, to do it for fun, to do it. Look, you can do anything
Right.
you want for fun. I don't care,
Right.
but I think when you reinforce, I don't think it's a blow for feminism to reinforce an erotic exchange of signs or symbols that disempowers the older woman, disempowers the overweight woman, disempowers the disabled woman, disempowers the
Mm-hmm.
woman who just doesn't care to do that sort of thing.
Right.
So
Yes. Yes.
that's all. That was the only point I was trying to make. But
Yeah.
um, I
No,
want to
I
pivot
agree.
to some. Oh, okay. I'm
I was just
sorry.
going
Go
to
ahead.
say, and the other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't empower the caregiver, the woman who is
Right.
working for minimum wage or less, doing elder care or child care, or anything that ends in care. Right?
Right.
If you were really going to empower women, then you would see sort of women across the board becoming empowered. You don't. The sex industry is really not about that. You're absolutely right.
Right. Uh, uh, and one last topic I want to be sure to get to, because you called this week, and I think this is important to talk about this. You called this week for the Washington Post to fire George Will.
Yes.
And I want you to just talk about that, if you would, please, for a second, because I think it's very, very important.
Yeah, George Will absolutely needs to go. He put out a column that was actively damaging to victims of sexual assault. He derided and debased and demeaned them by claiming that they were greedy women that they had something to gain by having been sexually assaulted. Many women, especially, well, not just especially on campuses, but many women experience prolonged PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from sexual assault. And here's George Will deriding their experience and claiming that they are actually benefiting from that experience. It's the same kind of active harm that Todd Aiken did when he said women who are legitimately raped. If you're legitimately raped, your body would shut down the ability to get pregnant. We know that 35,000 women are impregnated every year in this country from rape, and the thing is that when men say that, influential men who are otherwise, who had in the past been deserving of respect. Todd Aiken was a respected politician running for the United States Senate. George Will has been a respected and powerful columnist in one of the most respected newspapers in this country. Men like that who say those kinds of things about sexual assault victims are re-traumatizing the victims. They are engaging in active re-traumatizing of those women. And that is why this column in particular, in my mind, so crosses the line that George Will needs to be dumped by the Washington Post.
See, here's why I so want to support you in this and do everything I can. I believe in freedom of speech. I say things that anger people. George Will has freedom of speech, but he doesn't have freedom to convey his speech as a columnist for a major newspaper. That is conferred upon somebody. And there's a difference between, in my mind, there are a wide range of opinions that are acceptable in discourse. What is not acceptable is the kind of opinion that is abusive and insulting to minorities, to people because of their identity, to victims. And in this case, I would say he's offended on multiple accounts in this incident, deeply offensive, by the way, deeply ignorant and unpleasant too. But in addition to that, I think we as a culture have a right to I don't want to say enforce, but to reiterate and establish certain norms. If he had written a column saying that black people have privileged status when they're the victims of racially motivated assault, or that religious minorities, Muslims and Jews, receive a privileged status when somebody burns down their mosque or synagogue, he would be rightfully fired. And I think this is an offense of equal magnitude. And how can people help you with this effort?
Well, we are going to be going online with a petition to the Washington Post. So let me say, Richard, you're absolutely right. If it was talking about racism, look at what happened to Helen Thomas.
Great point.
Her anti-Semitic comments, and she paid an enormous price for that. George Will needs to pay no less a price. So yes, we haven't got it up on the website yet, but we are going to be demanding that the Washington Post dump George Will's column. He's a syndicated columnist, so he sells his column to a number of newspapers, but the Washington Post is the primary. And also there's another allied organization of ours, ultraviolet.org. I think it's weareultraviolet.org. They have a petition up. I'm encouraging everyone to go and sign their petition as well. But we really need to ratchet up the pressure on the Washington Post. Fred Hyatt, the publisher of the Washington Post, or the I can't remember his position.
He's editorial. I think he's editorial editor. Yeah.
That's it. Yes, the editorial. He has stood up for George Will and defended him vigorously. We need to change his mind, and I think we can if we have a multiple petition effort and just keep the pressure up on this.
Well, I'm going to make a request that you keep us posted on that, because we're going to keep on that and strongly support you in that effort. And look, if Fred Hyatt and the Washington Post ownership doesn't respond, maybe we'll need to escalate. But I think that's a great cause and a very important one. And thank you for taking it on.
Thank you.
And Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women, thanks so much, as always, for joining us. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you'll come back again sometime.
Me too. Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you. And we will be right back after this on the Zero Hour.